Hello, everyone, and welcome to session 4 of Beyond the Surface. On behalf of the New Jersey section of the American Water Works Association, I just want to say welcome. We're all excited to have you here for the session titled Representation Matters. So this is the second to last session that we have in our series. We've covered many barriers to collaboration so far, but today's topic might be the most important one that we have. We're going to be talking about race and gender, which are two of the most visible identity groups that we hold. The experiences between different identity groups and their many intersectionalities can vary greatly, and often minority groups face an uneven playing field. So, in putting together today's session, our planning team asked this question. Within the water industry, do you feel that you have a valued seat at the table? As we explored this question, we kept returning to the role that representation can play in building a diverse and inclusive community. So today we have a great group of speakers to help us through this conversation, but we're going to start by introducing the subject with the help of the U.S. Water Alliance. Joining us now to talk about water and racial equity is U.S. Water Alliance Program Manager, Kayla Peterson. Kayla, I see that you're on, so I'm going to turn my video off, and then you can just cue me to move forward with all the slides.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kevin, for inviting me to be here, and thank you all for joining this conversation. Like Kevin mentioned, my name is Kayla Peterson. I'm a program manager with the U.S. Water Alliance. So I'm just going to dive right in. So go to the next slide. And since we're talking about representation, I wanted to start off with my water story, my personal water story. So counterintuitively, we're going to start at the top right. And so joined the water sector or became in love with the water sector as a camper. I went to nature camp, then became a camp counselor, and then was a recreational lead on the Colorado River. No, it's not the same Colorado River in Texas in the Grand Canyon, but we do have a Colorado River here in Texas. Or it's not the same one in Colorado, but we have one here in Texas. And that's where I grew my love and appreciation for water resources. I went to grad school looking at went to undergrad looking at international development, international work. And for me, water was more recreation, for relaxation. That's how I thought of water until the Flint water crisis happened. And then I realized that, people can't really appreciate the healing powers of water resources if they don't have access to their necessities. If people don't have access to clean and safe drinking water, it's kind of impossible to get to the point where we're recreating and enjoying water. And so that led me to pursue a higher degree, a master's degree in water resource management and international development, kind of two of my loves at that time. So that gave me the opportunity to travel to Guatemala, where I got to work with sea turtles, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen, olive Ridley sea turtles, but then also work with the local community to ensure they had the skills and knowledge to protect their natural resources, but then also benefit from the tourism and the other benefits associated to natural resource management. So that was an eye-opening experience. And then I also had the opportunity to travel to the West Bank and to Palestine, which you'll see in that smaller circle where I'm sitting in a wadi, which is a really amazing natural phenomenon. But I got to work with both Palestinian and Israeli date farmers on water conservation and resource management in the hope of peace and collaboration building. And that experience really opened my eyes to the inequities around water resources and how water can be weaponized in a lot of different scenarios, but also the opportunity to collaborate around resource management. While I had these great experiences traveling and working abroad, in the back of my mind, I had the experience of when I interned with a congressional representative over the state of Texas and over the region of Houston, which you'll see kind of in that middle picture. I got to intern there during the fall of 2017, which is when Hurricane Harvey hit. So I was sitting into those offices, listening to my constituents and telling horror stories about how they lost their homes, how they lost their livelihoods and lost everything. And so that really opened my eyes to the water challenges in my own country and my home state, my backyard of Texas. So really encouraged me to work a little closer to home to address some of the water challenges and the water issues that we have here in the United States and in Texas. And that led me to joining the Texas Water Development Board, which you'll see in the top left, where I worked with agricultural producers, water managers, and academics on water conservation measures to protect natural resources. But working at the state government level also exposed me to how we manage our resources and invest in infrastructure, and how these systems often leave behind those that are most vulnerable. So when the opportunity arose to join the U.S. Water Alliance and work a little bit closer to some of that equity work, I was really excited at the opportunity, and I jumped to that. And so I just like to end my water story that at the center of it all is a small town, a fourth generation Texan who inherited land from my great grandfather, who escaped slavery, worked on the railroad, and ultimately settled on the Colorado River in Texas to find rest and refuge for himself and his family. And that land is still in my family today, which you'll see in the photo. And so I'm privileged to have that story and have that connection to water. So therefore, I fight for to ensure that all people have access to clean and safe drinking water and sanitation, but ultimately so everyone can have the freedom and the ability to recreate and enjoy the restorative powers that our natural resources can bring. So that's, in a nutshell, my water story that I wanted to share with you all. And like I said, to the next slide, it led me to the U.S. Water Alliance. And so who is the U.S. Water Alliance? Similar to an AWWA or WEF, we're a member organization, but we like to say we're a cross-sector member organization. So we pull in folks from the nonprofit, from community advocacy, academics, and other strategic partners, all come together in the hopes of building a one water future, which means, more integrative water management and connections across all sectors and all individuals who touch water. So that's kind of a nutshell the U.S. Water Alliance, and we advocate and promote a one water mindset through these different avenues. But I specifically kind of want to dive deeper into our water equity practice. So in addition to one water, the Alliance drafted a definition of water equity. So we'll go to the next slide, where I'll really quickly highlight water equity. This term was drafted alongside with our partners and our members, and it kind of launched the creation of the Water Equity Network, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. But it's all about people who come together to advancing water equity. I'm not going to read this definition in detail. You can definitely look it up, and I'll share it with you. But I'm going to go to the next slide, where we break down the definition into three main pillars. So basically, when we say water equity, it kind of falls into these 3 or 4 categories. The first pillar is all about water access. Is water affordable? Is water clean? Is the service equitable? That's what the first pillar is all about making sure people have access to water. The second pillar is all about money. Who gets paid? Who gets the jobs? Who gets the contracts from the water sector? And which communities get investment? Are we making sure that the money associated with the water sector is shared equitably throughout all communities and throughout all individuals? And then the third pillar is looking at climate resilience. Are we considering the communities most at risk in our planning, in our funding, and in our projects? Are we ensuring that the communities who are hit hard and hit often are on the forefront of that climate planning and that climate resiliency? So those are the 3 main pillars of water equity. The last element is the cross-cutting element, we like to say, that underlines all 3 pillars, is authentic community engagement. Making sure that communities are at the table and a part of the decision-making processes when it comes to their water future. And we like to say the phrase, nothing about us without us, really highlighting the need to include communities in the process. So I wanted to ground in our foundation of water equity and the pillars just so you kind of have a better understanding of where the racial equity toolkit came from. So on the next slide, I wanted to introduce y'all briefly to the toolkit, which, like I said, it came out of the Water Equity Network. We socialized the term of water equity with our network and with our members, and they begin asking for more guidance on how to do this work, and specifically how to do this work around race. And this came up because I think in 2018 or 2019, we published a report with Dig Deep, and I can send all this information over, but we published a report with Dig Deep that indicated or outlined that race was the #1 predictor of water access and water outcomes. And additionally, this was published in 2022, 2 years after 2020, where we were having a racial reckoning in this country, and water utilities were coming to the lines asking for guidance on how to address the racial disparities in their communities. So you can use that QR code to pull up the toolkit now, but also make sure to share all this information to Kevin and he'll get it out to y'all. But that's where the toolkit came from, is, you know, helping utilities specifically with a guide and a framework on embedding racial equity practices both internally and externally. So really quickly, I want to take a look inside the toolkit itself to get y'all a little bit more familiarized. So on the next slide, we'll look at the toolkit, and the toolkit itself is broken into 5 thematic areas. So there's a lot of content here. So the 5 areas include organizational development, community partnerships, workforce development, capital projects, and then customer service. So this is an aim to cover all the processes and procedures within a utility in order to highlight the robust and holistic adoption of racial equity practices that's needed to really do this work well. In addition, the toolkit is structured in a phased approach that ranges from pre-action to authorization, to underline that equity is often a journey and not a destination. And so if you look at this, you can see that there's somewhat of a clear path from one phase to the next. But at the same time, the toolkit acknowledges that growth is not always linear, and there might be elements happening in phase 0 and phase 2 simultaneously. So there is flexibility in this structure. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper on the next slide and look quickly at the organizational development thematic area of this toolkit. I do not expect you to be able to read this text, so no pressure to look at it. Like I said, I'll send it out afterwards, but I just wanted to kind of give y'all an understanding of a breakdown of how we break down the organizational development section. And within that section, we have 4 topics, from inclusive culture, service and equity ethos, racially equitable outcomes, and data and transparency. So these topics are going to help utilities take a holistic look at how the organization operates and where there are opportunities to embed metrics for equity. And so I pulled out this topic because twofold. One, I think this thematic area, I should say, is the best place to start if your organization's getting started on equity work in general. But additionally, per the topic of this webinar, we're talking about representation and talking about getting more diverse folks in the water sector. Looking at this section, specifically inclusive culture is going to be a really great guidance and topic to look at, to make sure not only you're attracting individuals from diverse backgrounds, but you're building a culture that makes them want to stay long term, and you're building in that retention. So that topic, the inclusive culture, is a really great guidance to make sure that your internal culture is inclusive and welcoming to people from diverse backgrounds. But then additionally, the other topics like service ethos, racially equitable outcome, and data can also be tools to help you ensure you're building a robust and diverse workforce. Like, are you addressing historical inequities or the history of the organization? And that falls under the service and equity ethos. Are you building out outcomes and metrics to track the diversity in your utility, to track the amount of people in leadership roles from a diverse background? That's where racially equitable outcomes will come, to make sure that you have metrics in place to drive this diversity versus just having a blanket statement of like, we want diverse folks. Like, that's great in practice, but what are you actually putting in on paper to make sure you're tracking and achieving those goals? And the last topic is around data and transparency. How are you collecting data on your current workforce and the different roles people play? And how are you making sure that you're collecting metrics on the change or the growth of that diversity within your organization? So all that to say is this toolkit can be a really helpful guidance and a resource to help people look at their organization, look at their utility, and identify opportunities to embed equity and embed inclusive practices that will attract a more diverse workforce into your utility. And lastly, I would want to say on this slide that I'm currently working with a group of city teams who have committed to a 24-month focused task force on these skills. I'm currently working with folks that are walking through this toolkit, looking at each of these topics and identifying opportunities to embed them into their organization. So if you want to learn more, we'll have some resources that come out of that. And lastly, I just wanted to end on all this work, the toolkit, definition of water equity, all falls under the Water Equity Network. So if you want to learn more, if you wanted some resources on how to do this work, or just want to be with like-minded folks who have shared passions around driving equity and diversity, definitely join us in our mission and our movement. You can grab the QR code there, or feel free to reach out to me. Kevin will share my information. So that's my framing document or framing presentation. And thank you so much for the time and inviting me to speak with you all.
Thanks, Kayla. And I will say, if anybody in the audience has not checked out the full racial equity toolkit, that is going to be shared with everybody in our resources document. So you'll get a Zoom link after the session, or you can visit the webinar webpage. Kayla's contact information is on there if you're trying to get involved. So definitely check that out. It's a really great and impactful resource. So with that, I'm going to ask the rest of our panelists to turn on their mics and cameras. So if you saw our marketing material, you might have seen that Nicole Brown was going to be on our panel. Unfortunately, she was unable to join us, but thankfully, Kayla is going to be staying on and filling that fourth panelist spot. But let me go ahead and introduce our other panelists today. Joining us, we have Julissa Copeland, Public Information Officer, City of Newark Department of Water and Sewer Utilities, Deandra Cameron, Policy Manager, New Jersey Future, and Lindsay Holt, DEI Program and Proposal Coordinator for Suburban Consulting Engineers. Thank you all for joining us. We're very excited to have you all on. Now, Kayla started her presentation with a little bit of a water story, so I'm hoping that each of you can introduce yourselves that way, just give the audience a little bit of background on who you are. So very briefly, Julissa, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julissa Copeland. As Kevin said, I am the Public Information Officer for the City of Newark Water and Sewer Department. And I'm thrilled to be here with you all, with fellow water professionals. I can't wait to share more about what the City of Newark is doing about DEI and representation. And regarding your question, I guess my water story began when I had my lead service line replaced in 2020. And looking back on it, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was really my first introduction to anything related to water infrastructure, anything related at all to how water gets to my tap. And then from there, when I went to Vassar College, really throughout college, I always had an affinity towards environmental stewardship, environmental issues. And then in my junior year of college, I began interning for a small nonprofit organization called Water And, based in DC. It really targeted getting our youth engaged with these environmental issues, including water scarcity, water conservation, et cetera. So I grew my passion for water there. And then when I graduated, I heard of an opening back in my home city of Newark for communications, a communications intern position. And I automatically took it. I knew it was a great opportunity to grow, not just in the water sector, but in my professional life. And I'm grateful to Director Kareem Adeem for allowing me to grow and learn with him. And now it's kind of a full circle moment. I'm back in my home city working for my water department, in which I've always been a recipient of Newark Water. So yeah, it's truly full circle just to be talking with you all and sharing more about what Newark is doing around DEI and representation. And that's my story in a nutshell.
Thanks, Jalissa. We'll go to DeAndre next.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My water story, I would say two themes come up: value and access. So my story began, I'm a Jamaican immigrant, so I migrated when I was 17. But my early memories of water involve just not having tap water, so having to travel just to get it for food, for laundry, for showering. And then secondly, I think I really understood the value of water from my time in the US military. So I was a 92 Golf, which is a food service operations specialist, which meant I was in charge of food handling, getting water to troops, feeding troops. But that sometimes meant in the desert where we don't have a system to deliver water. So just seeing how you bring water to places that don't have the infrastructure for that, and just understanding the value of water to national security, but also health. I think water and food is right up there with any equipment that troops need to protect our safety. And so that's kind of where my water story comes from. And right now I'm a policy manager at New Jersey Future. So I work with communities and I do a little bit of lobbying to ensure there are policies in place for access and delivery. So I'm excited to hear from everyone else.
Great, thanks, DeAndre, and thank you for serving. All right, we'll go to Lindsay to wrap it up.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'm excited for the conversation today. I am realizing that this is more common than I, thought before, but I ended up in the water industry extremely accidentally, which was funny because my dad was an engineer in the water industry for many years. But I used to work in a cross-cultural ministry, and I had to leave when I came out as queer. And I was extremely lucky to have already been connected here at Suburban and able to find a job. And I eventually took on the work of our DEI program, and that's when I got involved in AWWA. And I don't know that I really intended to stay all that involved at first, but the welcome from people in the organization made me want to stay in the water industry. And that's just kind of when I fell in love with the whole mission and purpose and the people. I think my defining moment was attending a conference and seeing another trans person there. And that was when I realized that this was a place that I could really belong and bring my whole story and my whole person to my work. And so that's just, yeah, it was a really special place, and I'm really glad to be here and part of the water industry.
Thanks, Lindsay. And the whole point of this webinar is about representation, and you just mentioned the power of that representation. So I'm wondering if any of the other panelists can chime in on if representation has impacted you throughout that water story, throughout your careers, or if you are turning around and trying to build representation for future generations of water or to improve our water industry. Maybe Jalissa, we'll start with you. I know Newark does some great work in that area.
Yes, so I'd say just me being here, just me being in my role for a year and a half now, I am a direct result of representation in the hiring process at the City of Newark. We prioritize hiring Newark residents. We prioritize that because we realize the value of having Newark residents represent the general Newark population. So the City of Newark is a highly diverse city where over 50% of our residents identify as Black or African American. Almost 30% now and growing are identifying as Hispanic or Latino. And we have at least a third of our residents speaking a language other than English at home. So with those numbers, we definitely have to make sure that Newark residents are in those roles and representing the general population. And the city is also spearheading some programs, such as the Newark Watershed Science and Leadership Academy. It's a new program that we're developing to get our youth in Newark Public Schools engaged with the opportunities that are available in water careers in the water sector. And by designing this program, we're letting our youth know, hey, this is an opportunity that is in reach for you. It's something that Newark residents are already doing. We have Newark residents in the chemistry lab. We have Newark residents as operators in our water treatment plant. So we are really just making sure that this program reaches the youth so that they know that these opportunities are available to them.
And Kayla, what do you see in terms of representation with, you have the Water Equity Network. Is that a component of it? Have you seen the impacts of that?
Yeah, I would just say on a personal level, it's been very impactful. Like I mentioned at the top, I'm from Texas, originally born and raised. And so growing up in Texas, being in the environmental sector, I've always been one of the few and only Black individuals, definitely a young Black woman. And so just for me joining the network, I've been able to work with people from across the country, from communities who have been working in water for years, from New Orleans to Atlanta to Jackson, and like learning from their experience and their ability to advocate for equity and water outcomes for their community. So it's been really encouraging for me on a personal level to work closely with those individuals, but then also from a staffing purpose role to like uplift the stories of community members who have been advocating for solutions and been identifying solutions for their community. So like within the network, I think there's just a great, robust richness of experience and wealth from leaders young and old that I've been able to pull from. But additionally, I would say the Alliance is working to build that workforce development element. Like I mentioned at the top, I have a task force focused on racial equity, but there's also a task force focused on workforce development and helping utilities build pre-apprenticeship programs or internship programs that gets new people into those jobs and into those roles. So I think it's twofold. I think there's already a lot of great Black and brown communities who are doing the work and advocating for themselves. And I've got to experience that by working with community-based organizations that are based in those communities. But then also the second fold is Alliance is currently working on workforce development initiatives to make sure that those individuals have pathways into water utilities and professional roles to help shape the water future, instead of just working alongside the utilities, but working in them as well. So I think there's twofold, like there's already a lot of richness, in our network, but making sure that we have, direct pathways into the water utility to help shape those decisions and those outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And Deandra, what do you see on the legislative side of things?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest success story for me is that I'll walk into the legislature, right? And they know I'm a lobbyist, I'm working on a bill, but what's been effective is having community members, impacted populations directly come into the legislature and speak to their leaders themselves. And those are their constituents, those are the people they actually represent. So I've seen the value of being that bridge between here's the policy, here's the outcome that we need, and here's the impact and how this impacts you, and allowing folks to tell their stories. Being a tenant myself, that's also something I bring to this space. And I know this is a water group, so we all know about customers who are not they're not bill paying customers, so sometimes they don't get that mail with their name on it. And so being a champion for door hangers or lawn signs or anything like that that can make tenants or any other populations that feel that they don't have access to that information is something that we also like try to champion. So there's a value in kind of bringing that background and that aspect to make sure that I'm always advocating on behalf of those. And I think something else in the legislature that really helps is that sometimes there are these issues that tenants have with their landlords, especially with even with water systems. You're communicating with the property owner, but sometimes it's the tenant and the occupant that's at that property, and you want to do some work, you can't get in because the landlord lives in another state. So a lot of the representation is kind of working with communities to say, hey, you also need to meet with tenants. You need to talk to us because we're the ones at home. We're the ones that can open the door. So I see a lot of that coming up in the work and just having those voices at the table.
Mhm. And I hear you mentioned being a champion for advocating for, and those are all, terminology that we associate with allyship. So I'm wondering, like, what is in terms of when you're looking at representation versus allyship and all the different identities that we have. And I'm going to probably throw this one to Lindsay, just because there is not a lot of trans representation in the water industry. You mentioned you met one person at a conference. So do you think that allyship or representation would be more impactful for you feeling included and welcome in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, everything in balance. So, like, I think both are really important. I think that representation probably is a bigger piece of making space and having that comfort level, because it kind of means that when I walk into a room, I know that there's someone else there that's going to understand like the challenges I'm facing or my background or experience, and what we're bringing to a conversation that we're having. But I do think that allyship is also really important. And, a lot of that has to do with education. And so, as people learn more and are more educated and aware of issues and just the experience of the people that they're working with and meeting with, that they can make that kind of space to be able to understand what people are bringing in with themselves into the room, as well as knowing how to support and ask the questions that are needed, and design, systems and spaces and policies that are inclusive and that reduce that overall mental load that someone's carrying in a space where a lot of people don't look like them. So I think, allyship can definitely go a long way.
Hmm. And Jalissa, you mentioned that you are newer to Newark, and we did have a session all on different generations in the workforce, but the intersectionality of these things definitely complicates it, comes into play. And I think for younger members of the water industry, allyship can be especially impactful. So, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, my water journey so far has been, short because I've been in my role for a year and a half now. But nonetheless, I feel I've entered the water space at a pretty cool time because I entered the Newark Water and Sewer Department with a cohort of other fellow young, talented women of color who were here before me. So I felt a comfort and um, welcomed by having them there. They really supported me and are supporting me currently in my growth and personal growth, not just professional and personal growth in the department. And I feel like it did make a world of a difference, including also my colleagues who are clearly allies of the cause. Um, it's really just wonderful having a safe space to grow, learn, um, and just work comfortably and be myself without having to worry or fear any sort of discrimination. I think that goes back to what Lindsay was saying. The idea of a safe space. Really, DEI is all about safety, to me at least. Making sure that everyone has the right to work and be in a safe space.
Definitely. So, I'm gonna kind of go off my regular questions here because something that we talked about in one of our prep calls was the idea of creating spaces for different affinity groups. And I'm going to shout out the Blackwater Professional Alliance, which does an amazing job in creating spaces for Blackwater professionals. But I think to advance the conversation, there needs to be, the work done with everyone, not just a certain affinity group. But there's also on the flip side, you do need to create that safe space that so that people feel comfortable and welcome. So do any of the panelists have thoughts on how to strike that balance between creating safe spaces for whatever identity group you might associate yourself with, while also welcoming in and opening up to conversations with, people that might be allies or just might need a little bit of knowledge and conversation and welcoming to understand the differences that we all have?
Yeah, I guess I could start. I think it does. And my journey is I started off being very a little bit, I think, isolated from the Black water professionals community. And then I got introduced and it did a world of difference for me. So I think there is a need in terms of pulling people in, but I see those spaces as a launching pad. And I think that's where you create the balance. So there's that setting up that support and allowing allies to be able to sponsor that, fund that, create that space, and provide the mentorship and the opportunities for those platforms, but also having them. Having that space and that platform very visible and integrated into programming. And I think in terms of bringing people in, I think it's a push and pull. And so direct relationships really matter. One person pulled me into the alliance, and now I'm, making connections. So I think that's super, super important, especially in the context we're coming out of like a virtual COVID world. But I think now's the time where everyone's starting to introduce and meet people. And it's been really valuable to kind of have that one-on-one kind of mentorship and pulling people in and introducing them. I think that's how those spaces build authentically. And then securing allyships and creating launching pads for those to branch out and be more visible in other spaces.
Yeah, I would agree and say I think those spaces are important. And like you said, it's twofold. It's a balance. I think it's important to save those spaces for people to like kind of restore their soul or to have community, to commiserate in times with others and have that authentic space. But I think we also need to be bringing people along, and we can do both. And we don't. That doesn't necessarily mean changing that space, that community space. That can mean creating a different space or a conjoined space where everyone can come together. But then another piece I want to say is like sometimes not putting a lot of the work on the person of color or the minority or the person most at risk to be the one explaining or be the one bringing folks along, because a lot of times it's a lot of emotional load, it's a lot of mental load to do that work. And so I think that's where allies really do come in. Having an ally, like, I don't want to call anyone out, but I know there's some allies in the Water Equity Network who aren't people of color, who might be a white man or a straight person who still advocates for representation, still advocates for equity. And sometimes having that voice and having that ally and having them take on some of that burden really makes the load lighter for everyone who might be directly experiencing injustices or barriers to entry. And so I think the power of allyship is really important as we're building a more diverse and inclusive coalition or workforce in the water sector.
So going off that, I think some people tend to shy away from those difficult conversations, whether they just are unfamiliar with the subjects, and they haven't talked to people about their different experiences, or they're afraid of saying the wrong thing and offending someone. How do you break down barriers or create spaces to have those conversations so that somebody can become an ally or educate themselves and progress in their journey, so that it's not all on a minority person to lead the way in terms of that?
My first thought is I think don't catch people by surprise. I think if you prepare enough and say, "Hey, we're gonna do this and we're gonna also have this conversation," it lets people get prepared. I remember there was a time I was invited to lead some DEI work, and in in the application process, there was a little reflection that says, "Here's a self-assessment. to know if you really want to take this on. And I think that was so incredible for me because like I was like, "Oh, do I really want to take this on?" But I felt cared for in the moment that like I don't have to say yes to this, but also if I'm going to say yes, I'm prepared to say yes because I know what this entails. So I think that's my one is like set people up for success. Just say that we are having this conversation. And I think sometimes people we don't like ground rules and all that because we're not babies, right? But I think those setting those ground rules for conversations is really good. And I was in one space before and they had kind of like a neutral third party like a captain person that would just let people take a step back if conversations weren't going in a productive way. And so that person is not in the conversation, so it doesn't feel like they're just pushing their point, but they're kind of just the eyes and ears to make sure that they're visibly seeing like facial reactions and things like that. So those are some learnings that I've seen that they work well.
Kayla, you looked like you were about to jump in too. So what do you got?
Yeah, I think everything Deandra said was on point. Like 100% agree that, having kind of rules of engagement. I think there's twofold. I think there's more formalized when we're having these conversations in a formal setting and we know this is coming up versus more of an informal, casual, maybe I meet you at the conference, I want to ask you a question. In the formal setting, I think we need to, like in the Water Equity Network, we have collaboration principles. We have principles that we call out every time we meet. They're like, hey, this is how we respect each other's time. We respect opinion. I don't have to go in that, but like having some type of grounding principles, having space for people to check out or check in if they need, and then having good facilitators. We have the Water Equity Network staff or facilitators, but sometimes we bring in additional facilitators to help move along hard conversations because we acknowledge it is an emotional load to talk about race and gender and sexuality in the workplace where we've been trained not to talk about these things. So I think having those measures in place, if it's a formal setting, and then acknowledging that informal conversations will come up and, encouraging people who are allies or who want to learn more to be okay with checking in with people's emotional capacity. Be like, hey, I have a question about race, or I have a question about representation. Do you have the time for this? Are you okay talking about this? Again, it may seem like, kid playground rules or whatnot, but I think it goes a far way to acknowledging and respecting people's boundaries when it comes to emotional and potentially weighty conversations and like having a personal check-in. I think, Deandra, you also said that having a personal relationship with people is really important. And so pursuing that personal connection with not just the aims of, extracting from this person.
I think that's great advice. Sorry, go ahead, Lindsay.
No, that's fine. I think a kind of unifying theme there is that the key is seeing someone as a person rather than like a means to an end. Either in DEI spaces, I think sometimes we can kind of see and hear or like expect people to offer us, information or something like that as that's their purpose. Like we're here to hear from this person about their experience in DEI in as a Black professional, as a trans person, as something, and that's just all we're here to hear from them, and all we're interested about is what they can offer us on that topic, and for us to learn from them. Where I think we need to be able to also see them as a person with unique experiences. They're not speaking for everyone, but they're also having, they have emotions and background and family and all these things that contribute to what they have to offer. And I think also, in our ultra professional spaces, we see people as the work that they do. And so like they are just also a means to getting a project done, signing something off, like moving on. And so I think both of those together, like seeing someone as their whole person and everything that they are bringing, experiencing in the world and trying to take the steps to see the world a little bit more through their eyes helps us to be able to appreciate them as an individual and as a person, to be able to include them better in our spaces and really, be able to support and meet the needs of everyone.
Yes,
All right.
I'd like to add just one last thing to the conversation. We mentioned ground rules, and I think the reason why we're taught those as kids is because it works. It applies not just to childhood, but adulthood. So it's not as childish as we might have think because it works. Yes, setting ground rules when having difficult conversations, definitely keeping an open mind, um, and making sure that just not one person, especially a person of color, does not take the mental load or emotional load of, and is not the teacher. We don't want to treat them as the teacher because we all hold a responsibility in making sure that we stay informed about all these important topics and how to best navigate them.
Mhm. So we got a couple questions left here, and I'm going to go back to something Lindsay said for our next question about, we're not a means to an end. You got to know the person beyond these identity groups. But, in terms of diversity and the intersectionalities of the different identity groups we have on this call, there's a lot of diversity. And we talk about the value of diversity and what value that brings. And I guess there's a path to understanding what that value is while still respecting who the person is. But I'm wondering, what all your thoughts are on the value that your unique diversity brings to the water industry, and if you even view it that way.
I'll briefly start. I think specifically to the city of Newark, I think my job as a public information officer is easier because I'm a Newark resident. So I have that perspective. I live off of Bloomfield Avenue. What would I want to hear from my water and sewer department about a water main break? Do I want to hear text alerts? Do I want to get a mail to my house? Do I want to, I can get a sense of how a typical or average Newark resident would feel, or how they would want to be communicated with about various water and sewer issues, or how they want to stay connected with our department. So I think being a resident here, living here, being born here, gives me a unique, perspective and makes my job easier, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that's a really important question. I think it's really good to reflect on that. I'm someone who's experienced and struggled with imposter syndrome. So just like making sure that I'm seeing my value and highlighting my value in my work. But I see just being a younger Black individual from Texas, a majority state where in the environmental sector, it's not a lot of Black folks. I definitely bring my lived experience, like I said at the top of the call, my love for recreation and love for enjoyment of water resources, and then looking at water more than just a means to an end, but like a potential to have a deeper relationship with our environment and with our resources. Like I bring that to it. And then also, I work with a lot of utility staff, which I think are great, and they're experts and very knowledgeable, but a lot of times they can be very focused on how things have worked historically and how like a scientific background, but I really have a love and a heart for communities and connecting with the diverse groups of communities. And so bringing that expertise of, the lived experience of our community and communicating about the water in a way that is accessible to everyone. I think that's a real value that I bring to my work.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think from my background in the military, there's two things that I always carry with me. I think the first is there's a phrase we say in the army, mission first, safety always. So you can't really put one above the other. And I think when we think about the water work and our infrastructure and all of that, I'm always thinking there is a way to have safe, clean water all the time, and the mission of delivery can also be accomplished. So that's something that's really cool when I'm lobbying because I'm like, no, there's a way to get this policy and it works and it'll fit. But the other thing that always creeps in the back of my mind when I think like the imposter syndrome comes up, 'cause in the policy and lobbying space, it's a lot of white males, very dominated, and sometimes you're negotiating, you know, and so when I was in training in the military. There was a day that I was complaining. I was like, "Oh, I'm a female. I shouldn't really be doing this." And my drill sergeant looked at me and she said, we're all soldiers here. And so sometimes I look back at my title and I'm like, oh, I'm a policy manager. I can figure this out. And it's not to say that your identity or what you bring in the space doesn't matter. You bring that with you, and then you're also equipped if you have the proper training and the proper guidance and you have the qualification. Yes, it's an addition, but you are qualified to do this job because you receive the same training just as anybody else. So those are the two things, the two ways that I bring my background from that aspect into the work that I do.
Lindsay, you want to jump in here?
Um, yeah, this is a good question. I've been thinking about it a lot, but I think that trust is probably the biggest answer I have of what the benefit of diversity in general in the water industry is. And, kind of like Julissa was saying, that it's important for the public to be able to see people who understand their concerns in the water sector, and that increases their trust for what they need to hear, and everything like that, and communications. I think even just in consulting at Suburban, like having me being at the company and having our DEI program means that either clients or new employees are more likely to trust us because they can see that we're, interested in having diversity at the company and in making sure that our workplace is inclusive and a safe place. Because, I'm here and we have all of the program and policies in place, and you can kind of see that it's someplace that is that's a high value for us.
Mhm. So let me go to a audience question here on promoting diversity and inclusion in terms of water infrastructure ownership, um, you know, specific to the Black community and how we can ensure equitable access and opportunities for Black communities in the water industry. And Kayla, I'm probably going to lean on you with this one and probably some of the work you do with the Water Equity Network at the U.S. Water Alliance.
Yeah, I was looking at that question. I think there's a lot of great strategies. I could go over a lot of them, but some things are just like breaking down. I saw the comment around contracts and making sure Black businesses were getting contracts, making sure you're breaking down contracts into like smaller, more manageable contracts that allows minority businesses to participate. I know a utility that has requirements of if a contract's of a certain size, they need to have a percentage of Black-owned businesses participating, and that's built into their metrics as well. I know another utility that created an online bidding platform where all the utilities and all the local entities place their bids on one platform, and enables individuals to bid on them, and they welcome minority and Black businesses to join that platform and give them kind of first review. And also I've known another utility that actually provide training and guidance to businesses so they can be competitive in their bids. So I think there's a lot of different avenues that you can do to equip and prepare businesses to engage into the environment, the economic benefits that are associated with the water sector. But I think it really starts with going to those businesses and talking to them, making sure that they're aware of the opportunities and learning what their barriers are, because it's really hard to build out strategies without listening to the people who are most impacted. So I think working directly with the business community in your respective locality will be the first step to identifying the best strategies or programs to enable them to participate in contracts or the economic benefits of the water sector.
Thanks, Kayla. Got a couple minutes left here, so we're going to do one more question here. Audience question that I'm going to tweak a little bit, because the American Water Works Association right now is looking ahead to Water 2050 and what the landscape is going to be, and charting our path to 2050 in terms of just improving our industry. So for each of you, in terms of the conversation today, where do you think we are at Water 2050?
I'm gonna jump in. It's probably not a tangible thing that I could say right now, but I think I think by 2050, we should all understand the value of water. Bringing it back to communities of color, I think that journey though starts with restoring trust. They have
Mm.
to value the recreational use, what's coming out of the tap, all of that. And I think we're slowly getting there, but I think 2050 is the reckoning. Like we will be beyond like what the value of water is, because I think that's the journey we're on right now. And I hope that's where I hope by then we're like, okay, we get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also like to jump in and say, I think we're also well on our way to the goals outlined in Water 2050. I will say I'm a bit saddened lately in the climate of this country that we're seeing the narrative around DEI being misconstrued and twisted and reshaped to something that it isn't. I think I see DEI as a way to ensure safe spaces. I said this, but it really comes down for me to make sure that everyone, people of color, but everyone, not just it doesn't just benefit people of color, but every person in the room benefits from having a safe space to work and to just be themselves and um, be in their have their identity without fear of judgment or discrimination. So I hope the narrative is not misconstrued, especially by people in the water space. That DEI is not a hindrance; it's a benefit. It's there to help us be safe, all of us be safe. Um, and if we stick with that narrative, which is the true narrative that everyone should be safe, then I think we will continue to be on our way to achieve those goals in Water 2050.
Yeah, I think y'all both had such powerful reflections, and it's just bringing up to me that we are in an inflection point. I feel like in our country with climate change very much not on the horizon, but here, and then the political environment that we're in around DEI, it just highlights the need to push forward and to push on and to continue fighting for equitable water access and also restoring our relationship with water and with nature. Yes, I want everyone to have access to water, but I also want us to stop harming our waters, to stop polluting our waters, to stop putting chemicals in our waters. So I have a lot of hope for the future because right now we don't have too many other options except for to fight for better water resources and fight for more diverse communities of representation. And yeah, that's my hope, is that the people managing the water resources are reflective of the communities, accessing those water resources. So, and more community ownership and community decision making. That's my hope, and I think we have all the pressures and all the incentives to make the right decisions now. And I'm encouraging us all to be part of that movement.
All right, Lindsay, wrap it up.
I was gonna say, I don't want to go last. You got those were all really good answers. Um, I'm on the AWWA's standard committee writing the DEIB standard right now, and so one of the things that on the topic of like current climate we've been talking about is how to adjust the standard to accommodate concerns around DEI. And at the end of the day, that's a tool for utilities and organizations to use, but we're aware like of the limitations. And I think one of the things I've been thinking about is how to design it with the lowest barrier of entry for someone who might not have considered how DEI can benefit the organization before until they've seen this. And so I think that's something that for Water 2050, I'm hopeful to see, is that that won't be a hindrance anymore, like that people will understand the benefit that DEI brings to their organizations and to their communities, and that will be that will be in a water industry where individuals have the information that they need and feel connected to their water utilities and the water around them in their environment.
Thanks, Lindsay. And we're going to wrap there. Good message of hope and a lot of work to be done. And I am thankful for the four of you for coming on and helping drive that work forward. So that will wrap it for today. but we do have one more session coming up in November. So please follow the webpage. We'll have registration open soon. During the next session, our finale, we'll be focusing on a few key programs throughout the water industry that collaborate across organizations and utilize DEI best practices to build towards that one common goal of clean, safe, and affordable water for everyone. So with that, again, I'd like to thank our speakers, and I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for joining us and going beyond the surface. We'll see you again next time.